The blood-red sun sank below the jagged horizon as Beatrice Montgomery fired her Winchester rifle into the evening sky, the sharp crack echoing across the open plains like thunder. The men who'd been pursuing her scattered like startled quail, diving behind rocks and into ditches for cover. No one had expected the woman who had just robbed the Silverton Bank to turn and fight, least of all with such deadly precision. It was 1878 in the Colorado Territory, and Beatrice, Wild Bee, to those who knew her reputation, had just added another daring exploit to her growing legend. At 23, she'd been outrunning the law and societal expectations for years, leaving a trail of admirers, enemies, and broken hearts in her wake. "That'll teach you to follow a lady uninvited," she shouted, her voice carrying across the plains as she holstered her rifle and urged her Palomino mare forward, the stolen money secure in her saddlebags. Her long auburn hair streamed behind her like a battle flag as she rode, untamed as the frontier itself. Miles away, in the small settlement of Redemption, Yates Walker wiped sweat from his brow as he hammered the final nail into Mrs. Holbrook's new porch step. At 30, he had spent most of his life on horseback, driving cattle across the unforgiving terrain of the West. But lately, he'd set down tentative roots in Redemption, taking odd jobs and helping the townsfolk with repairs while deciding what came next in his life. "Fine work, Mr. Walker," Mrs. Holbrook said, handing him a glass of lemonade. "You've got skilled hands for a cowboy." "Just Yates, madam," he replied with a tip of his hat, "and thank you. My pa always said a man should know how to build as well as ride." "Well, Yates, you're a rare find in these parts. Most men who come through here either have a bottle in their hand or a gun, sometimes both," she sighed. "Speaking of trouble, have you heard about that Montgomery woman? They say she's hit another bank, this time in Silverton." Yates had indeed heard stories of the infamous Beatrice Montgomery. Her exploits were becoming legendary across the territory, bank robberies executed with cunning precision, always managing to escape the law, sometimes leaving flowers for the bank tellers as a mocking gesture. Unlike most outlaws, she never hurt innocents, which had earned her a peculiar kind of respect among some. "Wild as a mountain lion, that one," Mrs. Holbrook continued. "They say her own father disowned her when she refused to marry the man he'd chosen, took up with outlaws instead. Now she's running her own gang. Sheriff in Durango says she's too wild to be tamed." She clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "A woman like that is headed for nothing but trouble." Yates merely nodded, but something about the story of Beatrice Montgomery stirred his curiosity. He had never been one to judge others hastily. His years on the trail had taught him that people were rarely as simple as they seemed at first glance. As night fell, Yates made his way to the Redemption Saloon, a modest establishment that served as the social heart of the small town. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and conversation, much of it centered around the latest exploits of Wild Bee. "Heard she shot the hat clean off the Silverton sheriff's head," said a grizzled miner at the bar. "Didn't even break stride, just laughed and rode off." "My cousin works at that bank," another man chimed in. "Says she apologized to the teller for the inconvenience before taking the money. Gave her a red rose, too." "That woman needs a strong man to set her straight," declared Bartholomew Jenkins, the town's self-appointed moral authority. "Or a prison cell, probably both." Yates sipped his whiskey, listening but not commenting. He had little patience for men like Jenkins, who believed women were property to be controlled rather than people to be respected. "What do you think, Walker?" Jenkins challenged, noticing Yates's silence. "You've been around. Surely you've got an opinion on wild women." Yates set down his glass carefully. I think people are entitled to live as they choose, long as they're not hurting others. She's a bank robber, Jenkins sputtered. And you charged old widow Davis triple what her roof repair was worth last winter. Yates replied evenly. Different kinds of robbery, I suppose. The saloon erupted in laughter while Jenkins's face turned crimson. Before the situation could escalate, the batwing doors burst open and a young boy rushed in, eyes wide with excitement. Riders coming. 5 or 6 of them fast. The saloon emptied quickly as townsfolk moved to see the approaching group. Yates stepped onto the porch, hand instinctively resting near his Colt. In the dim light of dusk, he could make out several riders approaching at a gallop, dust billowing behind them. Leading the group was a figure smaller than the rest, sitting tall in the saddle with unmistakable confidence. As they drew closer, gasps and whispers spread through the gathered crowd. The lead rider was a woman, her auburn hair catching the last rays of sunlight as she guided her palomino toward the town. "Good Lord," someone muttered. "It's Wild Bee Montgomery." Beatrice surveyed the town with wary eyes as she and her companions slowed to a trot. Redemption wasn't on any major trails, which made it perfect for lying low after the Silverton job. What she hadn't counted on was a welcoming committee. "Evening, folks," she called out, her voice clear and confident despite the tension in the air. "We're just passing through, looking for a meal and a place to rest our horses." Sheriff Daniels stepped forward, his hand hovering near his gun. He was a reasonable man who preferred words to bullets, but he also knew his duty. "Miss Montgomery, I believe, your reputation precedes you." "All good things, I hope," she replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Afraid not. There's a telegram from Silverton about a bank robbery. Description matches you and your associates here." Beatrice's companions shifted nervously, hands moving toward weapons. The tension in the air thickened like approaching storm clouds. "Sheriff," Yates spoke up, stepping forward, "whatever happened in Silverton is Silverton's business. These folks haven't broken any laws in Redemption yet." Beatrice's gaze shifted to Yates, studying him with open curiosity. He stood apart from the other townsfolk, both in his calm demeanor and in the way he addressed her, not with fear or contempt, but with simple respect. Sheriff Daniels considered this. "Mr. Walker's got a point. I've got no jurisdiction over Silverton crimes." He looked back at Beatrice. "But I'll be watching you, Miss Montgomery. Any trouble in my town and you'll answer for it." "Fair enough," she agreed. "We're just looking for a peaceful night." As the crowd dispersed, Beatrice dismounted and led her horse toward the livery stable. Yates found himself following, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. "That was quite the entrance," he said as he caught up to her. "Wasn't planning on one," she replied, eyeing him cautiously. "Most men who approach me want something." "What is it you're after, Cowboy?" "Yates Walker," he introduced himself. "And I'm not after anything. Just thought you might like to know which establishments in town won't overcharge you or water down your whiskey." A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "That's surprisingly helpful. I'm Beatrice Montgomery," he finished. "As the sheriff said, your reputation precedes you." "Most of it's exaggerated," she said, then after a pause added, "Some of it's worse than they say." Yates laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her. "Well, Miss Montgomery, the Dakota Inn serves the best steak in 3 counties, and Martha who runs it doesn't much care about a person's past as long as they pay their bill and don't cause trouble." "And the local law?" she asked, nodding toward where the sheriff had stood. "Daniels is fair. He meant what he said, stay peaceful and he'll leave you be." Beatrice studied him for a long moment. "Why are you helping me?" Yates considered the question. "I believe everyone deserves courtesy until they prove they don't deserve it. You haven't done anything to me or mine." Simple as that. Simple as that. A call from one of her companions interrupted them. Stables want payment up front, she rolled her eyes. Apparently my reputation does precede me. Thank you for the advice, Mr. Walker. Yates, he corrected. Yates, she repeated, testing the name. Well, thank you. Perhaps I'll see you around Redemption. I expect you will. It's not a large town. As she walked away, Yates found himself watching her go, intrigued by the contradiction between the notorious outlaw of legend and the composed, intelligent woman he'd just met. Later that evening, Yates entered the Dakota Inn to find Beatrice and her companions occupying a corner table, their presence creating a bubble of space around them as townspeople kept their distance. Martha, the inn's no-nonsense proprietor, was serving them without the hesitation others showed. Beatrice spotted him and, to his surprise, raised a hand in greeting. After a moment's consideration, Yates made his way to their table. "Room for one more?" he asked. Her companions, 3 men and a young woman barely out of her teens, eyed him suspiciously, but Beatrice nodded. "Mr. Walker was kind enough to recommend this establishment," she explained to her group. "Seems only fair to offer him a seat." "Just being neighborly," Yates said as he sat down. "Neighborly to outlaws?" asked one of the men, a weather-beaten fellow with a scar crossing his left eyebrow. "That's unusual in these parts." "Bailey," Beatrice warned, then turned to Yates. "Forgive my brother, he's protective." "Brother?" Yates couldn't hide his surprise. The stories never mentioned Beatrice having family riding with her. "Half-brother," Bailey clarified. "Same mother, different fathers. Been looking out for this troublemaker since she was in pigtails." "And failing miserably at it," Beatrice added with affection. Over the next hour, Yates was introduced to the rest of her small band. Nathan, a former cavalry scout with a talent for tracking. Lewis, a soft-spoken Mexican cowhand who Beatrice had rescued from a lynch mob after he was falsely accused of stealing horses. And Sarah, a young woman who had fled an abusive husband and found protection with Beatrice's group. They were not the hardened criminals of legend, but a makeshift family of outcasts and misfits who had found loyalty in each other. They shared stories and laughter, careful to avoid any mention of their recent activities in Silverton, but open about their travels and adventures. Yates found himself drawn to Beatrice's sharp wit and the fierce protectiveness she showed toward her companions. She, in turn, seemed intrigued by his easy manner and lack of judgment. As the evening wound down, Beatrice walked with Yates outside the inn. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. "Your friends aren't what I expected," Yates admitted. "What did you expect? Bloodthirsty desperados?" "Something like that. The stories paint you as quite the fearsome gang," she laughed softly. "Stories get embellished. We've done some things I'm not proud of, but we've never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. And the bank robberies," her expression grew serious. "The banks have been foreclosing on small ranchers, driving families off land they've worked for generations. The railroad companies and cattle barons are buying up everything, and the banks are helping them do it." "So you're what? Redistributing wealth?" "Something like that," she echoed his earlier words. "Not that it makes it legal, but it does help me sleep at night." She paused, studying him. "Does that change your opinion of me, Yates Walker?" He considered her question carefully. "I've seen enough of the world to know that legal and right aren't always the same thing. I can't say I approve of robbery, but I understand fighting against injustice." Beatrice's face softened. "You're an unusual man, Yates Walker." "I've been called worse," he replied with a smile. "I imagine you have." She glanced back toward the inn. "We'll be moving on tomorrow. Redemption's been hospitable, but we shouldn't press our luck." "Where will you go?" "Better you don't know." "Safer for you that way." He nodded, understanding the wisdom in her caution. "Well, if you ever pass through Redemption again, I'll look for the unusual cowboy," she finished with a smile that, this time, reached her eyes. They parted ways, both sensing that their brief encounter had left a mark neither had anticipated. The next morning, Yates was repairing a fence on the edge of town when he heard a commotion. Riders were approaching not Beatrice and her companions, but a larger group, moving with purpose. As they drew closer, he recognized the emblem on their coats: Pinkerton agents, known for their relentless pursuit of outlaws. In town, the agents surrounded the sheriff's office, their leader dismounting with fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He was tall and lean, with cold eyes that missed nothing. "Agent Monroe, Pinkerton Detective Agency," he introduced himself to Sheriff Daniels. "We're tracking the Montgomery gang. Information suggests they passed through here." Daniels crossed his arms. "What's your interest in them?" "They've robbed 3 banks in the last month. The railroad companies and banking association have hired us to bring them to justice." Monroe's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "There's a substantial reward for Beatrice Montgomery, dead or alive." The words "dead or alive" sent a chill through Yates as he approached the gathering. He had no doubt which outcome Monroe preferred. "They were here," Daniels confirmed reluctantly. "Left at first light, heading south." Monroe's eyes narrowed. "South, toward the border." "That's the direction their dust was heading." Yates knew this was a lie. He'd seen Beatrice and her group riding east at dawn toward the mountains. Sheriff Daniels was deliberately misleading the Pinkertons. Monroe turned his cold gaze on the townspeople who had gathered. "Anyone else see which way they went?" The reward money could be shared with informants. No one spoke. Whatever the town thought of Beatrice Montgomery, they liked the Pinkertons even less. These men were known as hired guns for the wealthy and powerful, often using brutal methods to achieve their goals. "Seems no one's feeling talkative," Monroe observed. "No matter. We'll pick up their trail." He turned back to Daniels. "We'll be requisitioning supplies from your town, Sheriff. Food, ammunition, fresh horses if available." "Our supplies are limited," Daniels protested. "This is official business backed by the territorial governor." Monroe produced a document bearing an official seal. "I suggest you cooperate." As the Pinkertons spread through town, commandeering what they needed with little regard for the townsfolk's protests, Yates slipped away. If Beatrice and her companions were heading east, they'd likely take the old mining trail through Devil's Pass. The Pinkertons would eventually figure out they'd been misled and follow. Someone needed to warn her. Retrieving his bay gelding from the livery, Yates packed quickly and set out, telling the stable boy he was checking fence lines for a rancher outside of town. Once clear of Redemption, he urged his horse into a gallop, taking a game trail that would intersect with the route to Devil's Pass. The sun was high when he spotted dust ahead, 5 riders moving at an unhurried pace, unaware of the danger behind them. He pushed his horse harder, closing the distance. Beatrice's group spotted him approaching and immediately spread out defensively, hands moving to weapons. When they recognized him, their posture remained wary but less overtly hostile. "Yates," Beatrice called as he drew near. "What brings you out this way?" "Pinkertons," he replied, reining in his horse. "At least a dozen, led by a man named Monroe. They're in Redemption now, but they'll be on your trail soon," Bailey cursed. "Monroe, you're sure?" Yates nodded. "You know him?" "He's been after us since Denver," Beatrice explained, her expression grim. "He's not like regular lawmen. He doesn't give up, and he doesn't care about bringing people in alive if dead is easier." "Sheriff sent them south, but that won't fool them for long," Yates said. Beatrice exchanged looks with her companions. "We need to split up, make harder targets." That's what he'll expect, Bailey argued. We're safer together. No one asked you to risk yourself for me, Yates interjected. I just thought you deserved warning. Beatrice studied him with those penetrating eyes. Why, Yates Walker? Why risk yourself for outlaws you barely know? It was a fair question, and one he'd asked himself during the hard ride to find them. Maybe I don't like seeing people hunted like animals. Or maybe I don't trust men who value railroad money more than human lives. A smile ghosted across her face. Or maybe you're sweet on me. He felt heat rise in his face but met her gaze steadily. Maybe that too. Her smile widened briefly before her expression turned serious again. Well, whatever your reasons, we're grateful for the warning. But you should head back to Redemption before you're missed. No sense in you being linked to us. I've got a better idea, he said. I know these mountains. There's an old trapper's cabin near Crystal Lake, about 10 miles northeast of here. It's isolated, well hidden. You could lie low there until the Pinkertons give up and move on. And you just happen to know about this convenient hideaway? Bailey asked suspiciously. I spent 2 winters trapping in these parts before I took up cowboying, Yates explained. The cabin belonged to an old mountain man named Fredericks. He died last year. No one's claimed the place. Beatrice considered this. It's risky. If they track us there, we'd be cornered. They won't find it unless they know where to look, Yates assured her. And I can lead you by a route that won't leave much of a trail. After a brief discussion with her companions, Beatrice nodded. Lead on, cowboy, but if this is a trap, you'll be the first to regret it. Fair enough, he agreed. For the next several hours, Yates led them through terrain that would challenge even experienced trackers across rocky ground that held no hoofprints, through shallow streams to wash away their scent, and along game trails too narrow for the Pinkertons' larger party to follow easily. By late afternoon, they reached a dense stand of pines that concealed the small cabin nestled against a rocky outcropping. The cabin was rustic but solid, with a stone fireplace and enough space for all of them if they didn't mind close quarters. A small stream ran nearby, providing fresh water, and the surrounding forest offered good hunting. Not bad, Bailey admitted grudgingly as they settled their horses in a natural corral formed by a semicircle of boulders behind the cabin. How long do you figure we should stay? A week, maybe 2, Yates suggested. The Pinkertons will sweep the obvious routes first, then gradually widen their search. After a while, they'll have to move on to other assignments. Unless Monroe's made this personal, Beatrice said, which I think he has. As the others began organizing their supplies and securing the perimeter, Beatrice drew Yates aside. You've done enough, Yates, more than enough. You should head back before you're implicated in helping us. I'll leave at first light, he agreed, but I'll need to stay tonight. It's too dangerous to travel these trails in the dark. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. One night, then, and, thank you, not many would have done what you did. As night fell, the small group gathered around a carefully banked fire inside the cabin. Lewis prepared a simple but flavorful stew from their provisions, and Sarah produced a bottle of whiskey that was passed around as they ate. The mood was subdued but not tense. These were people accustomed to danger, to living on the edge of society. They took their momentary safety as the gift it was, knowing tomorrow might bring new challenges. After the meal, Nathan took first watch while the others settled in for the night. Yates found himself sitting beside Beatrice near the fire as the others bedded down. You never asked what we took from the Silverton Bank, she said quietly. Figured it wasn't my business. $3,000, she told him. Mostly money the bank had collected from foreclosures on small ranches in the area. That's a lot of money. It is. And we kept enough to keep us going. The rest. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a leather-bound journal. "This has the names of every family that lost their land. We've been finding them, giving them enough to start over somewhere else." Yates took the journal, paging through it. Each entry included a family name, the property they'd lost, and notes about their circumstances. Many had been marked as delivered with dates and amounts. "This isn't how outlaws usually operate," he observed, handing the journal back. "I'm not interested in being a usual anything," she replied with a hint of defiance. "So I've noticed." He studied her in the firelight, the flames casting shifting patterns across her features. "Why do it this way? Why not fight the banks through legal means?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Legal means? The law is written by men with money and power for men with money and power. My father was a lawyer. I saw firsthand how justice works differently depending on who you are." "Your father," Yates repeated. "The one who disowned you." Surprise flickered across her face. "You've heard that story," Mrs. Holbrook mentioned it. "Said you refused to marry the man he'd chosen." Beatrice was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "That's part of it. Augustus Montgomery, respected attorney of Denver, had arranged a marriage between me and Judge Carlton's son. It would have been advantageous for his career." Her voice hardened. The fact that Thomas Carlton was a cruel, entitled bully who had already hurt several young women didn't matter to him. "So you refused." "I did more than refuse. I publicly humiliated Thomas at a society ball by revealing what he'd done to my friend Elizabeth." Her eyes reflected the fire's glow. "My father gave me a choice: apologize and proceed with the engagement, or leave his house forever. And you chose freedom." She looked at him then, really looked at him as if seeing something new. "Yes, I chose freedom. It cost me my family, my position in society, everything I'd known, but I'd make the same choice again." "How did you go from defying your father to robbing banks?" "That's a longer story, involving my half-brother Bailey finding me, a corrupt sheriff who tried to force himself on me, and my discovery that I'm quite good with both a gun and a plan." She smiled faintly. "Perhaps I'll tell you the whole tale someday." "I'd like that," Yates said sincerely. They talked long into the night, sharing stories of their lives, his years driving cattle, her adventures outrunning the law. They discovered shared experiences despite their different paths. Both had lost mothers young. Both valued loyalty above all else. Both felt most at home under the open sky. When they finally sought sleep, Yates found himself thinking that Beatrice Montgomery was nothing like the wild, uncontrollable woman of legend. She was something far more complex, principled, intelligent, and driven by a fierce sense of justice that society had no framework to understand. At dawn, Yates prepared to leave as promised. Beatrice walked with him to where his horse was tethered. "Remember, stay at least a week," he advised. "Longer if you can manage it. I'll try to get word to you if I hear the Pinkertons have moved on." "How will you do that without raising suspicion?" "I'll figure something out." He hesitated, then added, "Be careful, Beatrice. Always am." She reached out suddenly, touching his arm. "You know, most people call me B." "Is that what you prefer?" She considered this. "From most people, yes, but I like the way you say Beatrice. Like it's something valuable." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Bailey called from the cabin, breaking the spell. "I should go," Yates said. "Yes, you should." But she didn't move away. Instead, she rose on her toes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "For luck, Cowboy." He felt the warmth of her lips long after he'd ridden away from the cabin, back toward redemption and a world that suddenly seemed duller without her in it. Returning to town, Yates discovered the Pinkertons had departed that morning, heading south as Sheriff Daniels had misdirected them. But the town was buzzing with their visit, and the revelation that the notorious Beatrice Montgomery had passed through their midst. "Heard you were out checking fence lines for the Preston place," Sheriff Daniels remarked when they crossed paths later that day. "Find any breaks?" The question was casual, but Yates caught the shrewd look in the lawman's eyes. "A few. Nothing that couldn't be mended." Daniels nodded slowly. "Good to hear. Those Pinkerton fellows were asking about you before they left. Seemed to think you might know something about the Montgomery woman." Yates kept his expression neutral. "Did they now? What gave them that idea?" "Someone mentioned seeing you talking with her outside the Dakota." "I told them you talk to everyone, it's your way." The sheriff studied him. "That was the truth, wasn't it, Yates? Of course, I'm a friendly sort." Daniels didn't look entirely convinced. "Well, they've gone south for now, but Monroe strikes me as the persistent type. He'll be back when he realizes he's been led astray. Might be good for everyone if Miss Montgomery and her friends stay clear of redemption for a while." "I imagine they will," Yates replied carefully. "Outlaws rarely visit the same town twice. Let's hope so." The sheriff tipped his hat and moved on, leaving Yates wondering how much the man had guessed about his absence. The next 2 weeks passed slowly. Yates continued his work around town, but his thoughts frequently drifted to the cabin in the mountains and its occupants. He found excuses to ride out in that direction twice, ostensibly hunting, but in reality checking for any sign of Pinkerton activity. There was none, which both relieved and concerned him. Where had Monroe and his men gone? On the 16th day after he'd left Beatrice at the cabin, Yates was working on the roof of the church when a rider came galloping into town, his horse lathered and blowing hard. It was a young ranch hand from the Bridger spread, about 20 miles south. "Pinkertons." The young man shouted as townsfolk gathered. "They've cornered the Montgomery gang at the old Wilcox mine." Yates nearly fell from the roof in his haste to hear more. The Wilcox silver mine had been abandoned years ago after a cave-in killed 3 miners. It was about 15 miles southeast of Redemption, and nowhere near the trapper's cabin where he'd left Beatrice. "How do you know this?" Sheriff Daniels demanded. "I was delivering a message to the Harmon Ranch when I heard gunfire, rode to investigate and saw the whole thing from the ridge. The Pinkertons have them pinned down in the mine entrance. They're demanding surrender, but there's been shooting from both sides." Yates's mind raced. Had Beatrice and her companions left the cabin? Or was this another group that Monroe had mistaken for them? "Sheriff," he said, approaching Daniels, "we should ride out there. Make sure no one gets killed unnecessarily." Daniels gave him a measured look. "This isn't our jurisdiction, Walker, and why are you suddenly concerned about a bunch of outlaws?" "I'm concerned about justice being served, not a massacre," Yates replied evenly. "You've seen how these Pinkerton men operate. They're not interested in bringing anyone in alive if they can help it." The sheriff considered this, then nodded reluctantly. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt to observe. But we're not interfering unless innocent lives are at risk." Within 30 minutes, Yates, Sheriff Daniels, and 3 deputies were riding hard for the Wilcox mine. As they approached, they could hear sporadic gunfire echoing across the dry landscape. Drawing closer, they reined in on a ridge overlooking the mine entrance. Below, at least 15 Pinkerton agents had taken positions surrounding the mine entrance, using boulders and abandoned equipment for cover. Occasional muzzle flashes from within the dark mine opening showed that whoever was inside was still fighting back. "Monroe," Sheriff Daniels called out, his voice carrying in the clear air. "This is Sheriff Daniels from Redemption." A tall figure detached itself from behind a wagon and approached, rifle held ready but not aimed at them. "This isn't your concern, Sheriff," Monroe called back. "We've got the Montgomery gang cornered. It's just a matter of time." "Have you confirmed it's them?" Yates asked. Monroe's cold eyes fixed on him. "You, the helpful cowboy from town, funny how you turn up now." His gaze shifted back to Daniels. "We tracked them here from a cabin in the mountains, a trapper's place that someone helpfully led them to." Yates felt his blood run cold. They had found the cabin. But if Beatrice and her companions were trapped in this mine, at least they were alive. "What are your terms for their surrender?" Daniels asked. Monroe laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Terms? They're outlaws with prices on their heads. Dead or alive, remember. And dead is considerably less trouble." "That's not how the law works," Daniels objected. "If they surrender, they're entitled to a trial. They'll get a trial if they come out alive." Monroe turned away dismissively. "Now clear out, Sheriff. This doesn't concern redemption." As Monroe returned to his men, Yates and Daniels withdrew to confer with the deputies. "He means to kill them all," Yates said tersely. "Looks that way," Daniels agreed. "But there's not much we can do. He's right that it's outside my jurisdiction." Yates stared down at the standoff, mind working furiously. "There's another entrance to that mine," he said suddenly. "An air shaft on the north side of the hill. It was dug after the cave-in to help clear the bad air." "How do you know that?" one of the deputies asked suspiciously. "I worked as a silver miner for a season before turning to cowboying," Yates replied, the lie coming easily in his desperation. "If someone could reach that air shaft, they might be able to get those people out before Monroe loses patience and rushes the main entrance." Daniels studied him thoughtfully. "And I suppose you're volunteering for this rescue mission, for people you barely know." "I don't like seeing anyone gunned down without a fair trial," Yates maintained. "Isn't that what separates lawmen from killers?" The sheriff sighed heavily. "You're determined to do this with or without my blessing, aren't you?" "Yes, sir, I am." "Fine. But my deputies and I aren't getting involved in a jailbreak. We'll create a distraction ride down and engage Monroe in another debate about jurisdiction. Might buy you 15 minutes. He fixed Yates with a stern look. "After that, you're on your own. And if you get caught, I'll deny knowing anything about your plan. Understood?" As the sheriff and his men rode down to confront Monroe again, Yates circled wide around the hill that housed the Wilcox mine. The north side was less steep, covered with scrub brush and boulders that provided decent cover. He left his horse tied in a small gully and proceeded on foot, keeping low. The air shaft wasn't hard to find, a square opening about 3 feet across, reinforced with timber at the surface and descending vertically into darkness. Beside it lay a windlass with a rope and bucket, used by the miners to lower supplies or bring up ore samples. Yates secured the rope around his waist and carefully began lowering himself into the shaft, using the rough rock walls for balance. The shaft descended about 30 feet before opening into what appeared to be a side tunnel of the main mine. Landing softly, he paused to let his eyes adjust to the gloom. The sound of gunfire was muffled but audible, coming from his right. Moving cautiously along the tunnel, he called out softly, "Beatrice, Bailey." The gunfire ceased abruptly, replaced by tense silence. "Who's there?" Came a suspicious voice. Lewis, Yates thought. It's Yates Walker, from Redemption. After a moment, a figure appeared at the junction ahead. Bailey, rifle raised cautiously. When he recognized Yates, his expression shifted from suspicion to guarded relief. "Walker, how the hell did you find us?" "Air shaft. There's another way out." Yates moved forward. "Where's Beatrice?" "Here," came her voice as she emerged from the shadows, a smudge of dirt across one cheek and determination in her eyes. "Are you alone?" "Yes, Sheriff Daniels is distracting Monroe, but we don't have much time. The Pinkertons are planning to rush the entrance soon." Beatrice nodded sharply. "Nathan's been hit. Not too bad, but he can't move quickly. Sarah's with him." Then we need to hurry. Yates explained about the air shaft and the route he'd taken to avoid detection. Bailey, get Lewis. I'll help Sarah with Nathan, Beatrice ordered. She turned to Yates. Lead the way, Cowboy. They moved as quickly as they could through the dark tunnels, Yates guiding them back to the air shaft. Nathan was conscious but pale, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his upper arm where a bullet had grazed him. The air shaft presented a challenge. Nathan would need to be hauled up with the windlass, and they'd need to go one at a time. Bailey went first, to secure the top and watch for Pinkertons. Then they carefully secured Nathan to the rope, and Bailey and Lewis hauled him up, wincing at every pained sound he made. Sarah went next, then Lewis. As Beatrice prepared to climb, the sound of voices echoed from the main tunnel. The Pinkertons were entering the mine. Go, Yates urged. I'll hold them off. Not without you, she insisted, grabbing his arm. I'm not leaving you here. There's no time for both of us, she cut him off with a kiss, fierce and unexpected, that left him momentarily speechless. Either we both go or neither of us does. That's how it works with me. The voices were getting closer. Making a quick decision, Yates called up to Bailey, both of us now, hurry. They secured the rope around both of them, pressed close together, and gave the signal. Bailey and Lewis began hauling them up, the rope creaking under their combined weight. They were about halfway up when a shout came from below. They'd been spotted. A shot rang out, missing them but sending rock fragments flying. Another followed, this one grazing Yates's leg. He bit back a cry of pain as they continued their ascent, Beatrice clinging to him tightly. Finally, they reached the top, hands grabbing them and pulling them to safety just as more shots peppered the air around the shaft opening. Bailey and Lewis quickly dragged a large boulder over the shaft to slow any pursuers. We need to move, Bailey urged. They'll be swarming this hillside in minutes. Supporting each other, the group made their way to where Yates had left his horse, finding that Bailey had brought their mounts to the same location. They mounted quickly, Nathan sharing Sarah's horse, and set off at a gallop away from the mine, taking a route that would keep the hill between them and the main Pinkerton force for as long as possible. They rode hard for several miles before Beatrice called a halt in a small canyon that offered some protection from view. Nathan needed attention, and Yates's leg was bleeding steadily. We need to separate, Bailey said as Sarah tended to the wounds. They'll be looking for a group of 6. We'll stand a better chance in pairs. Agreed, Beatrice replied. Lewis, you and Sarah take Nathan north toward the territorial border. Bailey and I will head east, try to draw them away from you. And Yates? Sarah asked, tightening the bandage around his thigh. All eyes turned to him. He was a complication, not part of their gang, but now implicated in their escape. He comes with me, Beatrice said firmly. Bailey, you go with the others. Make sure Nathan gets proper care. Bailey looked like he might argue, but after studying his sister's determined expression, he simply nodded. Be careful, B. Always am. They parted ways with quick embraces and promises to reunite when it was safe. As Lewis, Sarah, and Nathan rode north and Bailey headed east alone, Beatrice turned to Yates. That wasn't what we planned, he observed. Plans change. She examined his bandaged leg. Can you ride? Yes. It would be painful, but he could manage. Good, because we need to move. I know a place in the mountains where we can lie low until your leg heals and the Pinkertons give up. They may not give up this time, Yates warned. Monroe seems to have made this personal. Beatrice's expression hardened. Then we'll deal with that when we have to. Right now we ride. They headed west, toward the more rugged terrain of the mountain range. Beatrice set a pace that was urgent but mindful of Yates's injury, taking routes that would be difficult to track across rocky ground, through streams, doubling back occasionally to check for pursuit. By nightfall, They had reached a region of steep canyons and dense pine forests. Beatrice led them to a small cave hidden behind a waterfall, accessible only by a narrow ledge that their horses could just barely navigate. Inside, the cave was surprisingly dry and spacious, with evidence of previous habitation, a stone fire ring, stacked firewood, even some basic supplies in a wooden crate. "Another hideout?" Yates asked as he painfully dismounted. "One of several," she confirmed, helping him into the cave. "Bailey and I established them over the last 2 years. Never stay in one place too long, that's how you survive as an outlaw." She efficiently set about making a small fire, just enough for warmth without producing much smoke that might be visible outside. Then she turned her attention to Yates's wound, cutting away his blood-soaked pant leg to examine it properly. "The bullet just grazed you, but it's deep," she observed. "You're lucky." "Doesn't feel lucky," he grimaced as she cleaned the wound with water from the falls and a splash of whiskey from her saddlebag. "Trust me, it could be worse." She worked with practiced efficiency, suggesting this wasn't the first bullet wound she'd tended. "Why did you come for us, Yates?" "You could have stayed safe in redemption." He met her eyes in the firelight. "You know why?" She paused in her ministrations. "Do I? I think you do. Same reason you wouldn't go up that shaft without me." A smile touched her lips briefly. "That was practical." "You're too handsome to leave for the Pinkertons." "Is that all it was?" She finished bandaging his leg before answering. "No, that's not all it was." She sat back on her heels, suddenly looking vulnerable despite her usual confidence. "I've spent years not getting attached to people or places. It's safer that way, but you complicate things." "I've been told I have that effect," he said with a small smile. "I'm serious, Yates. You have a life in redemption, a respectable one. After today, that's gone. The Pinkertons will mark you as part of my gang. I made my choice." "But why?" She pressed. "You barely know me." He reached out, gently touching her cheek. "I know enough. I know you're brave and loyal. I know you fight for what you believe is right, even when the world says you're wrong. I know that despite what people say about you being too wild to tame, you're not wild at all, you're free. There's a difference." Beatrice leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his. "And that appeals to you. A woman who lives outside the law. Who can't offer you a home or stability or any of the things most men want." "I'm not most men," he replied simply. "And I'm not interested in taming you, Beatrice. I'm interested in loving you just as you are." The words hung between them, honest and unvarnished. For a moment, Beatrice seemed taken aback by his directness. Then something in her expression shifted, softened. "Loving me could get you killed," she whispered. "Some things are worth the risk." She moved toward him then, closing the distance between them, and when their lips met this time, it wasn't the desperate kiss of the mine shaft, but something deeper, more deliberate. A choice being made by both of them, with full knowledge of the consequences. That night, in the secret cave behind the waterfall, Yates and Beatrice found a connection that transcended their different backgrounds and paths. In each other's arms, they discovered a shared understanding of what it meant to live freely, to follow one's own conscience regardless of society's expectations. As dawn approached, they lay together on their bedrolls, Beatrice's head resting on Yates's chest as he gently stroked her hair. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft in the dim light. "That depends on what you want," he replied. "What I want?" She propped herself up to look at him. "No one's asked me that in a long time. I'm asking." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "I want to stop running." "Not to be caught," she clarified quickly, "but to find a place where I can be myself without constantly looking over my shoulder, somewhere my friends can be safe too." "That might be difficult with the Pinkertons after you." "I know," she sighed. There's talk of amnesty being offered to certain outlaws in the Arizona territory. Governor Fremont is trying to bring order to the region and is pardoning those who haven't committed violent crimes. Would you qualify? Possibly. I've never killed anyone who wasn't trying to kill me first, and those instances were self-defense. The bank robberies are the main issue. She traced patterns on his chest absently. What about you? What do you want, right now, to be with you? He caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. The rest we can figure out together. She smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. I like the sound of that, together. They spent 3 days in the cave, allowing Yates's leg to heal enough for comfortable riding. During that time, they talked about possibilities heading to Arizona to seek amnesty, perhaps starting a small ranch somewhere remote, or even crossing into Mexico where the Pinkertons would have less reach. On the morning of the 4th day, as they prepared to leave, a sound outside the cave froze them, both a horse approaching on the narrow ledge, weapons ready. They positioned themselves for defense. But the voice that called out was familiar. "B, you in there, it's Bailey." Beatrice relaxed slightly but kept her gun handy as she moved to the cave entrance. "Bailey, alone." "Just me, sister." Bailey entered, looking trail-worn but uninjured. His expression registered no surprise at finding Yates and Beatrice together, merely a raised eyebrow that Beatrice answered with a challenging look of her own. "The others?" she asked. "Safe. They crossed the territorial border 2 days ago. Nathan's wound is healing well." Bailey accepted the coffee Beatrice offered. "But I've got news you need to hear. The Pinkertons have pulled back." "What? Why?" Yates asked, suspicious. "Monroe's been recalled to Denver. Apparently, our father has been asking questions about his methods." Bailey directed this to Beatrice with a significant look. "Father," she repeated, shocked. "Augustus Montgomery is involving himself in this." Bailey nodded. "Seems he didn't appreciate hearing that his daughter was nearly killed in a mine. He may have disowned you, but apparently he draws the line at Pinkerton's shooting at you." Beatrice sat heavily, processing this unexpected development. How did he even know? News travels. The Silverton newspaper ran a story about the standoff. Someone recognized your name and connected it to the respected Denver attorney. Bailey looked between them. "There's more. The territorial governor has issued a statement about the amnesty program. Anyone who surrenders voluntarily, hasn't committed murder, and agrees to make restitution for stolen property will be considered." "Restitution?" Yates asked. "How would that work for bank robberies?" "Partial repayment over time," Bailey explained, "and community service. It's not freedom without consequences, but it's better than hanging or spending years in prison." Beatrice was quiet, considering the implications. "What about the others in our group? Would they qualify too?" "Sarah and Lewis would. Nathan has a prior manslaughter charge from a bar fight in Texas, so it's less certain for him." Bailey studied his sister. "Are you actually considering this, B, turning yourself in?" "Not turning myself in," she corrected. "Negotiating terms for a new life. There's a difference." Bailey looked skeptical but didn't argue. "Well, whatever you decide, I thought you should know the options." He glanced at Yates. "Though I suspect your decision might be influenced by new factors." "My decision is my own," Beatrice said firmly. "But yes, Yates's perspective matters to me." "And what is your perspective, Cowboy?" Bailey asked directly. Yates met his challenging gaze steadily. "I think Beatrice deserves a chance at a life where she's not constantly hunted. If amnesty offers that, it's worth considering, but it has to be her choice." Bailey studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly, a grudging respect in his eyes. "Fair enough." He turned back to his sister. "The governor will be in Silver Creek next week. If you're interested in discussing terms, that would be the time." After Bailey departed, promising to relay any new developments, Beatrice and Yates discussed their options long into the night. The possibility of amnesty offered a path neither had seriously considered before, a way for Beatrice to stop running without surrendering her principles. "If I did this," she said as they lay together under the stars outside the cave, "gave up the outlaw life, would you still feel the same way about me?" "Why wouldn't I?" "Because maybe what attracted you was the danger, the wild woman who lives outside society's rules." Yates propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her. "Beatrice Montgomery, I'm drawn to your spirit, your courage, your conviction. Those things don't disappear with amnesty. They're who you are, not what you do." She smiled up at him, moonlight silvering her features. "You always know the right thing to say." "Not always, but I always mean what I say." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Whatever you decide about the amnesty, I'll support you, and if you want me beside you when you meet the governor, I'll be there." "I do want that," she admitted. "I want you beside me for a lot of things." Yates Walker. The journey to Silver Creek took 3 days, during which they remained vigilant for any sign of remaining Pinkertons or bounty hunters. They traveled mainly at night, keeping to less used trails, and avoided towns where news of the Wilcox mine incident might have spread. Silver Creek was a growing settlement, more civilized than Redemption, but still maintaining the rawness of a frontier town. The governor's visit was a significant event, drawing people from surrounding areas for the chance to present petitions or seek resolution to local disputes. Beatrice and Yates observed from a distance as Governor Fremont arrived with his entourage, establishing temporary offices in the town hall. They had sent word ahead through Bailey, requesting a private meeting to discuss the amnesty program. "Are you sure about this?" Yates asked as they prepared to approach the town hall the following morning. Beatrice had abandoned her usual riding clothes for a simple but respectable dress borrowed from a sympathetic widow on the outskirts of town, her hair neatly arranged beneath a modest hat. "No," she admitted, "but I'm sure I want to try." The governor's secretary was initially reluctant to grant them an audience until Beatrice revealed her identity. That name, Montgomery, opened doors quickly, though whether from respect or notoriety was unclear. Governor Fremont was a practical man in his 50s, with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened without interruption as Beatrice explained her situation, her activities over the past 3 years, and her interest in the amnesty program. "Miss Montgomery," he said when she had finished, "you present an interesting case. Your crimes are significant: multiple bank robberies across 3 territories. But your methods have been notably non-violent, and you have support from unexpected quarters." He produced a telegram from his desk. "Your father has been quite persistent in advocating for your inclusion in the amnesty program." Beatrice's surprise was evident. "My father contacted you directly?" "Indeed. Augustus Montgomery and I have history together. We served in the same regiment during the war." The governor studied her. "He's a proud man, your father. Too proud to reach out to you directly, perhaps, but not too proud to act on your behalf when your life was in danger." Yates watched Beatrice absorb this information, saw the complex emotions crossing her face: confusion, hope, lingering anger. "What would the terms be?" she asked finally. "If I were granted amnesty, restitution, as much as is practical. Community service, your skills could be useful in our territorial schools. And a probationary period of 2 years, during which you would report regularly to a designated official." The governor leaned forward. "Most importantly, a complete cessation of all criminal activities. One misstep, and the amnesty is revoked. And my companions. Each case would be considered individually, based on their specific circumstances and willingness to abide by similar terms. Beatrice nodded slowly. I would need assurances of fair treatment, no surprise arrests, no harassment from law enforcement or Pinkertons. That can be arranged provided you uphold your end of the agreement. The governor glanced at Yates. And you, Mr. Walker. How do you figure in this arrangement? I'm here to support Beatrice, Yates replied simply. Her decisions are her own, but whatever path she chooses, I intend to walk it with her. Fremont's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. Well, Miss Montgomery, consider my offer. I'll remain in Silver Creek for 3 more days. If you accept the terms, return here with your decision and we'll formalize the arrangement. Outside, in the clear mountain air, Beatrice took a deep breath. That went better than I expected. Your father's intervention helped, Yates observed. Yes, her expression was thoughtful. I never thought he'd, after all this time. She shook her head, unable to complete the thought. Perhaps he regrets how things ended between you. Perhaps. She straightened her shoulders. But that's a matter for another day. Right now, we need to decide about the governor's offer. They spent the day discussing the amnesty terms, weighing the restrictions against the freedom from constant pursuit. By evening, Beatrice had made her decision. I want to accept, she told Yates as they sat in their small rented room above the town's quieter saloon. Not just for myself, but for Sarah and Louis too. They deserve a chance at a normal life. What about Bailey and Nathan? Bailey will go his own way, I expect. He was an outlaw before he found me, and he's not the settling type. She smiled faintly. As for Nathan, he'll need to decide if he wants to risk the manslaughter charge or remain outside the law. Yates took her hands in his. And what about us? Have you thought about what comes next if you're no longer an outlaw on the run? I have. Her eyes met his, steady and clear. I want a life with you, Yates. Somewhere we can build something together. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know I want you in it. I was hoping you'd say that. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple silver ring. I bought this today. It's not fancy, but it's perfect, she breathed, eyes widening. Beatrice Montgomery, will you marry me? Not to tame you or change you, but to love you exactly as you are, wild, free, and entirely yourself. Tears glistened in her eyes, surprising them both. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will. The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. Their kiss sealed a promise not just of marriage, but of a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding. The following day, they returned to the governor's office. Beatrice formally accepted the amnesty terms, signing documents that would be filed with territorial courts. Governor Fremont provided letters of safe passage to share with her companions, explaining the process for them to seek similar arrangements. There will be those who object to this amnesty, the governor warned as they prepared to leave. People who believe outlaws should be punished, not pardoned. Your path won't be easy. My path has never been easy, Beatrice replied with dignity. But for the first time in years, it will be honest. As they left Silver Creek, heading west toward the area where Bailey had arranged to meet the rest of their group, Beatrice rode with a new lightness. The constant vigilance, the need to watch for pursuit, these habits were hard to break, but gradually she began to relax. Where will we go? She asked Yates as they made camp that evening. After I've shared the news with the others and made arrangements for the restitution payments. I've been thinking about that, he replied, feeding branches into their small fire. There's land available near the Colorado-New Mexico border. Good grazing, water rights included, far enough from big settlements to avoid unwanted attention but close enough to a small town for necessities. You've put thought into this, she observed with a smile. I have been saving my earnings from odd jobs for years, never quite knowing what I was saving for. He met her gaze across the fire. "Now I know. A ranch," she asked, trying to picture it. "To start, maybe more eventually. The land has potential." Beatrice considered this vision of their future a home, land of their own, perhaps children someday. It was so different from the life she'd been living, yet somehow it didn't feel like a compromise or surrender. "I'd like that," she said finally. "Though I should warn you, I've never been much for domestic skills. My mother died before she could teach me to cook properly, and my father's housekeepers gave up trying." Yates laughed. "Lucky for you, I learned to cook on cattle drives. Between the two of us, we'll manage." Their reunion with Bailey, Sarah, Lewis, and Nathan took place at an abandoned way station 2 days later. Beatrice explained the amnesty offer and her decision to accept it, showing them the official documents and letters of safe passage. The reactions were mixed. Sarah and Lewis immediately expressed interest in seeking their own amnesty arrangements. Nathan was more hesitant, concerned about his prior manslaughter charge, but eventually decided to take the risk rather than continue running. Bailey, as Beatrice had predicted, declined. "The settled life isn't for me, sister," he said privately as the others discussed their plans. "Never has been." "I know," she replied, a touch of sadness in her voice, "but promise you'll visit and try to stay out of serious trouble." "I promise to visit," he said with a grin, deliberately addressing only half of her request. His expression grew more serious as he nodded toward Yates, who was helping Lewis repair a saddle strap. "He's a good man, different from the usual type drawn to you." "Yes, he is," she agreed. "He sees me clearly, Bailey, not as something wild to be tamed, not as an outlaw to be reformed, but as a person to be loved." "Then he's smarter than most." Bailey embraced his sister tightly. "Be happy, Bea. You deserve it." The group separated the next morning, Bailey heading north on his own, while the others traveled together toward the territorial capital, where Sarah, Lewis, and Nathan would begin their own amnesty processes. Beatrice and Yates accompanied them, both to provide moral support and to complete the formal procedures for Beatrice's restitution payments. The journey was strange for all of them, traveling openly on main roads, no longer hiding their identities or keeping constant watch for pursuit. They passed through small towns without incident, the governor's letters providing protection from local law enforcement. In the territorial capital, they found the officials largely respectful of the governor's amnesty program, if sometimes personally disapproving. The process took nearly 2 weeks, with multiple interviews, sworn statements, and legal documents to be completed. During this time, Yates arranged the purchase of the land he described to Beatrice, using his savings and securing a small loan based on his reputation as a reliable worker. They were married by a justice of the peace in a simple ceremony, with Sarah, Lewis, and Nathan as their only witnesses. As autumn approached, Beatrice and Yates journeyed to their new home, 300 acres of rolling grassland with a small creek running through it, backed by forested hills that provided both timber and hunting. The existing cabin was rudimentary but sound, and they set about improving it immediately, adding a proper stone chimney and expanding the single room into a more comfortable living space. Their first winter was challenging. Neither was accustomed to staying in one place for so long, and the isolation sometimes weighed on them. But they discovered a rhythm to their partnership, dividing tasks according to their strengths and supporting each other through difficulties. Beatrice proved to have a natural talent for animal husbandry, particularly with horses. By spring, word had spread among neighboring ranchers about her skill in gentling difficult mounts, and she began taking on training work that provided additional income while they built their own small herd of cattle. Yates's experience as a cowboy served them well as they established their ranch, and his easy manner helped smooth relations with neighbors who might have been suspicious of Beatrice's past. Most accepted the simple explanation that she was a young widow who had remarried, though rumors occasionally circulated about her true identity. In their second year, as required by her amnesty terms, Beatrice began teaching basic reading and arithmetic to children from surrounding homesteads once a week. Initially reluctant, she discovered an unexpected satisfaction in watching young minds develop, particularly the girls who responded to her encouragement to think beyond traditional roles. One evening, as they sat on their expanded porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Beatrice took Yates's hand and placed it gently on her abdomen. "I think," she said with a mixture of wonder and apprehension, "that our family might be growing." Yates's face transformed with joy as he understood her meaning. "Are you certain?" "Reasonably. It's been 2 months since, and I've been feeling different." She looked at him anxiously. "Are you happy about this?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he assured her, gathering her into his arms. "Are you? It's a big change." She considered the question honestly. "I'm nervous. I never saw myself as a mother, but yes, I'm happy." She smiled against his shoulder. "Though heaven help us if this child inherits my tendency toward rebellion." "I'm counting on it," Yates laughed. "The world needs more people willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult." Their daughter, Eleanor Bailey Walker, was born the following spring, a strong, healthy child with her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady gaze. From her earliest days, she showed the independent spirit they had anticipated, crawling and then walking earlier than most children, exploring her world with fearless curiosity. As Eleanor grew, so did their ranch and their connection to the community. The amnesty program had expanded, bringing other formerly outlaw families to the region. Some succeeded in their transition to lawful lives. Others struggled and eventually returned to their old ways. Beatrice maintained contact with Sarah and Lewis, who had settled farther south and started a small trading post. Nathan had eventually headed to California after completing his probationary period, drawn by rumors of new opportunities there. Bailey visited irregularly but reliably, appearing on their doorstep every few months with gifts for Eleanor and stories of his travels that were carefully edited for young ears. Despite his continued semi-outlaw status, he remained protective of his sister and her new family, occasionally handling problems on their behalf that were better addressed outside strict legal channels. 5 years after establishing their ranch, now expanded to include a proper barn, bunkhouse, and enlarged main house, Yates and Beatrice hosted a gathering of neighbors to celebrate the completion of a new schoolhouse they had helped build. The small wooden structure stood on the edge of their property, accessible to children from several surrounding homesteads. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over tables laden with food and drink, Beatrice found herself watching Yates swing their daughter in a playful dance while neighbors clapped in rhythm. Eleanor's laughter rang out, pure and joyful, as her father taught her the steps. "Quite a life you've built," came a familiar voice beside her. Beatrice turned to find Sheriff Daniels, now retired and gray-haired, but still possessing the same shrewd eyes. He had moved to a neighboring county after leaving his post in Redemption and occasionally visited. "It is," she agreed. "Different from anything I imagined for myself. Happier too, I'd wager," she smiled. "Much happier." "You know," Daniels said conversationally, "when I first heard stories about Wild Bee Montgomery, they always emphasized how untamable you were, said you'd never be content with a settled life." "People say a lot of things," Beatrice replied, watching as Yates now included another child in the dance, showing the same patience he'd always shown with her. They said I was too wild to tame. And were they wrong? She considered the question seriously. No, they weren't wrong about that. What they didn't understand was that taming wasn't what I needed. Her eyes met Daniels's. Yates once told me, I'm not interested in taming you, I'm interested in loving you. That made all the difference. Daniels nodded thoughtfully. Love instead of control, acceptance instead of change. Seems simple, but it's rare enough. Yes, it is. Beatrice's gaze returned to her husband and daughter, now joined by several other families in a circle dance. I'm still wild in many ways. I still believe in fighting injustice and standing up against those who abuse power. I'm still stubborn and quick-tempered and impatient with foolishness. But I've found a way to be those things while also being a wife, a mother, a neighbor, a teacher. She smiled. It turns out freedom doesn't have to mean being alone. As the celebration continued into the night, with music and dancing under stars that seemed to hang especially low and bright over their home, Beatrice found herself at the center of the community she had once believed would never accept someone like her. Eleanor had fallen asleep on a bench, her small body wrapped in a quilt, while Yates discussed cattle prices with neighboring ranchers. In this moment of quiet observation, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought her here from defiant daughter to notorious outlaw to respected rancher's wife. The path had been unpredictable, dangerous at times, but ultimately right for her. Later, as they carried their sleeping daughter home, Yates's arm around Beatrice's waist and the sounds of the continuing celebration fading behind them, he asked, "Happy, Mrs. Walker?" "Completely, Mr. Walker." She leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid strength that had been her anchor through all the changes. "Though I'm still not entirely convinced about your plan to expand into sheep next year," he laughed softly. "See, still questioning authority." "Always," she agreed with a smile. Their home welcomed them, warm and secure against the cool night air. As they settled Eleanor into her bed and prepared for their own rest, Beatrice felt the familiar surge of gratitude for this life they had built together, not a life of compromise or submission, but one of mutual respect and genuine partnership. In the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Yates gathered her close. "I have never once regretted choosing you," he murmured against her hair, "wild as you are. And I have never regretted choosing a man wise enough not to try taming me," she replied, nestling against him, "just loving me instead." Outside their window, the vast western sky stretched endlessly, stars scattered like possibilities across its expanse. Within these walls, they had created something neither had thought possible, a home defined not by society's expectations, but by their own terms. It wasn't always easy, but it was genuine and deeply satisfying. And in the years that followed, as their family grew with the addition of a son, as their ranch prospered and their connections to the community deepened, Beatrice and Yates continued to demonstrate that the truest form of love was not about changing the other person, but about creating space for them to be fully themselves. For Beatrice Montgomery Walker, once known as Wild Bee, the greatest freedom had come not from outrunning the law or defying convention, but from being truly seen and valued for exactly who she was, untamed and uncompromised, yet deeply and completely loved.